The
Hold on, Brian. Brian,
okay,
hold on. Once you're live, I'll let you know.
okay.
All right. So, welcome, everyone. Welcome, guys. So, if you are here, please go ahead to drop a message on your Discord room telling every other person to join this class. We currently have Brian on the call, and he'll be your instructor for today.
Okay.
All right.
Hi,
Brian, go
hi.
ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amaka. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a software engineer, currently based in Berlin, and I'm just here to have a discussion with you guys about JavaScript, especially the introductory part. So, my aim is to move quickly as possible. So, we have 1 hour. I'll take 45 minutes to go through some of the lessons that we have and some of the cases we could cover in introduction JavaScript, and then we can spare 15 minutes for question and answer. So I think you can write down your questions somewhere and then later type them. So I'll go through as many as I can because, as expected, there'll be a lot of questions, especially since the introduction part to JavaScript. So that being said, let's get right to it. So welcome to the class once again, wherever you're listening from. Yep. So thank you guys for joining. So yeah, what's JavaScript? That's the big question we're starting with today. So JavaScript is a scripting language, and like several other scripting languages out there, JavaScript is just one of them. Another good scripting language that we know of, or probably we've heard of, is PHP. But today we are talking about JavaScript, and most of my examples that I'll be sharing in this class, and most of the text and I must say key points would also be in this slide. So it will be available to be shared, just maybe in case you guys are worried, because the examples we'll be doing will be kind of live to make it interactive and give you guys a clear idea of what's happening. So yeah, and back to the definition of JavaScript. I'm using MDN's definition. So MDN is like one of the best documentations for JavaScript out there. Most of the references for this class is based on MDN because it's like one source that you can trust. And just in case, the references are also added to this slides. So it says that JavaScript is a scripting programming language that allows you to implement complex features on the web page. So you want to manipulate your web, you need JavaScript to do that. In the past, like when I would say web pages were used a few decades ago, when there was not much JavaScript, the interactions that we have on the web page was very little because we're just using a little bit of JavaScript, and some of the programming language that existed then were not able to manipulate our browsers and our DOM as JavaScript would. So we had like very little DOM manipulations and interactions going on. Like when you talk about animations and some of the cool and fancy stuff you see in today's browsers or web pages, it's JavaScript that enables all of that. So JavaScript itself is just what's it called? It's just like a programming language. But where JavaScript runs, an example is our Node.js engine, which is like a JavaScript runtime environment. Node.js helps you to run your JavaScript. I'm not going to go too much into that because it's a topic of its own. And then your browser is another machine that can run JavaScript. So here, this image shows types of JavaScript. this is not like scientific in some sense, in the sense that we just create this distinction sometimes to understand the type of JavaScript that we are dealing with. When we say client and server side, at the end of the day, it's still JavaScript. But when we say client side, a good example is your browser. So when you have your web page that is maybe built on one of the JavaScript frameworks, which we'll see in the next slide, we can call that client-based JavaScript. And a short summary of how it works is when you type in maybe the URL of any website, that's a client-based request. And then it goes through the internet, it hits the server. The server could be built with any other technology, say maybe Python, Java, mind you, there's a difference between Java and JavaScript. So Python, Java, maybe C# or something. But in this case, we'll assume that is built with Node.js, which is like a server-side JavaScript. And then it creates APIs, and then there's some interaction. A response is sent back to the internet. The internet sends back the response to the client. So that is why when you type maybe google.com or you type maybe a search, you see results, because all this happens when it hits the server. It hits the server with the request that you've made, and then it sends back that request to your device, which is the response that you see. So we have the web browser, which serves as our client, and all the JavaScript on that is all the JavaScript that is used on the browser at that time can be said to be in quotes client side JavaScript, and then the one that that takes in your request and then throw it down to process it to give you the results. It's something that you don't really know what's happening. Sometimes it's called back end. So at the back end, there's a lot going on, maybe data manipulations, API requests, and so many other things that could be going on. And that part of it is called the back end, which is the server-side JavaScript. So I'm just going to share like, I'll increase the size just so that it could be clear. So I'm going to create like a little example here to show you what JavaScript can do. So we have, this is a HTML file, and I'm guessing that if you're talking about JavaScript now, so it means you already know about HTML and you already know a little bit about CSS, and now we're talking about JavaScript. So the way to create or to use JavaScript in your HTML is to create a script tag, which I've already created here. And there are different types of script tag, but in this case, we just want to use the text slash JavaScript. And this async could be async, it could be defer, or it could just be nothing. It's an advantage. It just helps you, it tells your browser or this particular HTML page how to behave with the JavaScript. So we'll leave it back to what it was, which was async. And now this is a paragraph. So let's view this. So you can see, let me increase this. So you can see that this says this is a paragraph, which is the text that we have here. This is a paragraph. So if I say one, as you can see, it also changes. So, yep, it also changes. Sorry for that. Yep, so it also changes. And now we just want to do like a simple manipulation here. And then we can say that we want to target this particular paragraph. So that's why I gave this paragraph the ID of paragraph. So when you assign an HTML element an ID, it makes it easy to target that particular element. So here we can now say to target this, we'll say const. They can say para for paragraph, and then we can say document dot get element by ID. And in this case, the ID is what paragraph, and then we put that here. So that gives us access to this paragraph. So that's the first thing we do. And then we can now say we want to create, so what we're trying to do is, I want when I click this, when I click this, I'm able to maybe perform a certain action, which you're going to see shortly. So for me to be able to add a click event to this, because clicking is an event, moving your mouse also is an event in JavaScript, another topic of its own. So let me not bamboozle you guys with too much information. So yep, now we can say para dot add event listener. And what's the event listener want to add? Want to add?
Hello, Brian.
Yes.
Sorry for cutting in. Please, can you increase your screen a bit?
Okay, the one with the
Editor.
okay.
Okay. Uh,
Is it better?
okay. This looks better. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we have event listener, and then the event listener want to add this click, and we want to say um, create a function that will call update content. So this update content is a function that we are going to define shortly, but has not yet been defined. So we can do that by saying function and then call this update name, sorry, update content. I think there's a typo here. Okay, so now the function is defined. And so what do we want to say? We want to say that we want to create another variable here, and we say that context is equals to prompt. And then what do we want to do? We want to say enter new content. And what's the next thing I want to do? We can now say the para, which is this paragraph we had here. We say text content. So what text content does is that it changes the value of this is paragraph 1 to whatever we decide to put here. So we can now say that this should be equal to say new content, and then we can pass the variable, which is context. So what we're simply trying to do here is this will create a prompt in our browser that allows us to take a value, and that value is stored in this variable. So we use variables to hold values. That's just what variables are. We'll get to that shortly. And then now that we have the value in the variable, we can then pass it into the content of the paragraph. So I think that's that. Yep. So you see, I click this. It says enter a new content, and we can say this is the new content. Okay, so we can see that. So that's basically what. So this is like a simple example of what JavaScript can do. There's so many things. You talk about animations, you talk about interactions like clicking. Maybe you're adding a button, you click a button, you want it to maybe perform a certain function, a certain task. That is what JavaScript basically helps you to do. So this is just to show you, and this is called a DOM, like your browser page is called the DOM. And what we just did is we just manipulated a piece of the DOM using JavaScript. So JavaScript helps you, manipulate your browser content or your web page content. Let me just say your web page content in this case. So yeah, now going to the next slide, we are talking about JavaScript frameworks. There are different frameworks because if we want to build an application with JavaScript, it could be painful doing it, like doing all of this, like adding event listeners, because by JavaScript standard, when you add an event listener, you also have to clean up after adding an event list. Nice. A different concept. I don't want to go into that. So when we talk about building web page with JavaScript, this is vanilla JavaScript. It could become really tedious because there's just too many things that you have to cater for by yourself, and that is why we use frameworks, because these frameworks already have a lot of this inbuilt, and makes our web development like faster, smoother, and also cleaner. So we have Backbone, Meteor, React, which is like my personal favorite, Vue, Svelte, and the likes. So moving to the next slide, we're going to look at declaring variables. Now, if you see in this previous example, we declared a variable here called para using const. Now, in JavaScript, there are different ways of declaring a variable. You can use var, which in today's practice or in web development, it is a no-no. And we are going to see one of the reasons why using var is not an accepted practice in modern web development. So first of all, we have to know what var is. So it says var declares a variable, optionally initializing it to a value with a function scope, and can be redeclared or reassigned. So let's move here and variable JS. So we say, let me increase this. So we can say that var, we can call this var variable, and we can say this is a var variable. So we've declared the var variable, and now I'm trying to show you why var is bad. So now this is a JavaScript file, and in this scope, we'll call this from here, we can call this a function scope, as you can see here. So the entirety of this file is the function scope. So we'll say that this var is global to this scope, which is a function scope. Now we're going to declare a block scope like this. Say if true. This is just an example. So some of this syntax are not like this is not good practice, but just to make a point. So you can say if true, var, then we say var. Okay. So we can say var variable, and then we can say this is a modification of the initial var. So if we console the log var variable, by default, what we're supposed to get is this is a var variable, because this is the one that is at the outer scope or at the outmost scope. And this is a block scope, which is supposed not to be accessed. But guess what happens when we run this? What we get is, let me increase this so that you can see. I don't know if it's possible. Okay, I think it's not possible to increase this at the moment. So what we're getting is, this is a modification of the initial var. We are getting this variable, which by right is not supposed to be accessed because it's within a blocked scope. So inside this if statement, any variable inside there is not supposed to be accessed on the outer scope, which is the function scope. So because this is a block scope, and we'll see that shortly. So the best practice when in web development or when writing JavaScript code is to use, let me comment this out, is to use let or const. So let and constant are kind of similar. They are like within a scope that we call the block scope. They function within the block scope. The difference between let and const is that let can be reassigned, but cannot be redeclared, while const can be const can neither be redeclared nor reassigned. So if you see here, we're able to reassign this var variable, although it's inside the block scope, which is allowed. But I will make a good example, I'll make a good case shortly. So so let's use a let scope, and I say let variable. This is let variable, and now say the same thing. So we say let, and then we can change this to let variable, and we can say this is the modification of the initial let. So see what happens here when we try to console.log. So when we try to console.log this, you see that we get the initial variable here, which is let variable. This is a let variable because it's on the outer scope. Now, if we comment this out, we'll run into an error because at this point, let is no more defined. So because the let, the variable is now inside the block scopes and cannot be accessed outside that block scope. That is why it is undefined. So this is a good behavior rather than what we have, because if we had maybe an initial variable here and maybe we're using the same name here, we know that this one is not going to override, sorry, the one inside here is not going to override the one that was declared before. So that is one of the reasons why we use this. And so let me show you an example of a redeclaration. So let's say let variable can now be equals to this is the new let variable. So say console.log let variable. So let's run this. So what we're getting is this is the new let variable as understood. So so the difference between let and const is that it can be redeclared. So if I change this to const, I have an error. It will say that you cannot reassign this. So you cannot reassign when you're using const, but you can reassign when you're using let. So if you know that you have a variable that you still want the value to change, then you use let. But if you're sure that you want the value to remain stable across maybe the entire lifetime of that application, then you use const. So const means it cannot be redeclared. So that's just the difference. But we can see where scoping comes into play, comparing the let, the var, and the const. So just to reiterate again, let and const are similar, just that let can be reassigned, while const cannot. And those two are different from var in terms of the scope of accessing them. So we use this so that we don't mistakenly redeclare a particular variable that has been declared previously, which could lead to unwanted bugs and something that we do not foresee. So yeah, this is just like a simple example that shows you the difference between var, let, and constant, and the reason why you should use one over the other. So going to the next slide, we're looking at different JavaScript data types. And one of the popular JavaScript data types, these are like primitives in JavaScript. So primitives are like values that cannot be, you cannot change their original nature. So like an example is null, undefined, boolean, number, big int, strings and symbols. So I just felt like I should add this there because it's like an important part of JavaScript, like knowing the different data type. Because when you get into advanced JavaScript and then maybe you start dealing with TypeScript, then all of this would make more sense. But yeah, I feel it's something that we should discuss. So, or I would say highlight. And then for the next thing we're looking at loops. So what is a loop? A loop, we use loop to run through an item in an array mostly. And an array is just like one of the um, JavaScript data structures. We have arrays, we have objects, we have trees, and the likes of them. But the most popular data structure that you would always find in JavaScript and in web development is an array. So we're going to look at, sorry about that. We're going to look at some examples regarding an array. So there are different ways of looping through an array. There is a for loop, there's a while loop. Beyond that, there is a for each loop, there is a map, there is a reduce, and a host of them. So, but we're just going to be looking at the simple ones so that we could know how an array works and how to, loop through an array. So you say for the for statement, create a loop that consists of three optional expressions enclosed in a parenthesis and separated by semicolons. So if we want to create a for loop, this is what we do. We say, so now we're going to use this FizzBuzz example to create a for loop. So we'll say that for, and we can now declare a variable using the let. And we can say I is equals to 1, which is the first statement. And then we can then say that I is lesser than 101. So it means that we want we want this loop to start counting from 1, but it should stop at 100, which means that when I is less than 101, which is 100, then the loop should terminate. So every loop should always have a point of termination. And then you can say I plus plus. What this does is it increases the loop so that when I is equals to 1, the loop knows that I have to run again, increases it to 2 until it gets to the point where this condition fails, and then the loop is terminated. So we want to create the FizzBuzz example. So what FizzBuzz is, it's a very popular algorithm for basic level JavaScript. We want to say that if I modulus, this percentage sign is called modulus in programming. And what a modulus is a modulus is a way of dividing a number, but rather than getting the actual value of division, you're getting only the remainder. So we can say that if I modulus 15 equals to 0, so we're saying that if any value of I divided by 15 is equal to 0, examples are 15, 30, 45, 60, and you know the rest. Then we can say console.log FizzBuzz.
Hello, Brian.
Yeah?
Sorry to come in again. Okay, I think you would have to zoom in on your editor a bit more. We have some students saying it's too small.
Okay. Sorry about
I
that,
think,
guys. I
okay.
think, yep. So I think,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah,
it
so
should work.
this,
Thank
okay.
you.
Yep. So we have the first statement, FizzBuzz, and then we can say that if I modulus 5 is equal to 0, which means that numbers that are perfectly divisible by 5, then console.log was. And then for the last statement, we say that if I plus 3, then it should be console console.log log, then fizz. And then for the rest of the numbers, then we can now say that we can say if, else if we're running out of time. I'm trying to go as quickly as possible. And then we can say else. Then we can also say console. Need this. So log, then I. So what we are saying is for the ones that doesn't match these conditions, we should just console.log them. So if I run this, can I increase this? Let me do this on a browser so that you guys can see that it's better that way. So just like I said, your browser is also a JavaScript engine. It can run JavaScript. So if we want to run this here, we just open this console and then put it here, and then we run. So you can see that 1, 2, then when it's 3 fizz, 4, 5 buzz, 6 fizz. So this is the fizz buzz. You get the idea. So this is what you use your for loop for. If we want to do this with a while loop, so most times it's easy to use a for loop because a for loop, you know when your loop starts and when it ends. A lot of people find it difficult using the while loop because the while loop is a bit tricky. You have to, a while loop is used mostly when you don't know how many times you would loop. But in this case, we know how many times we're looping. So if we want to do this with a while loop, we can do something like this. We can say that let I equals to 0. And then we can say while I is lesser than 101, then, so if I is lesser than 101, oh, sorry for the freezing, then we should keep increasing I, and then we can just do the same thing that we've done here. Just take this and put in here. And boom, we've done the same thing using a while loop. So let me clear this. So let me run this here. So still the same result. So this is with a while loop. So now you see we use for loops, while loop, and all of that. There are so many techniques of looping. You can also still use something like a map or for each, but it depends on the use case. So yeah, I need to quickly run through some other examples. We have this. So this is a while loop, and we'll say that so if else condition. So just to use the same example to reiterate, when we did this, so you can say in this code, these are if else statements. If means that only when the condition is met, that is when a certain action should be done. So if else, it's kind of a modification to the if statement. So you use if else when an if statement already exists. So say maybe you have a weather application and you want your weather application to maybe give you some different messages depending on the use case. So you have, say, if the weather is sunny, maybe console.log sunny, and you can say that else if other options. So you use else if other options, and then you use else when no condition is met. So use else is maybe if the weather is nasty. Nasty is not really a weather condition, and that's so we use else just in case the condition is not met. It's kind of like a fail-safe for us. Let me see if I can do a quick example of like the weather app. So let me see, I think there's an example here we can explore together. And so just to save a lot of time, because we're running out of time, I know that there's a question. So we can see that here we have a function, say set the weather. And what this does is that this function takes a choice. The choice could be either sunny, rainy, snowy, overcast, you get the idea. And then when there's no option passed, we get this message. So if we're to run this function in our browser, this is what happens. So we'll run this function. So we'll declare the function, and to call the function, we'll call the function like this. We'll call the function like set weather, and then we can now pass in our value. So we say sunny. So it say it's nice and sunny outside today, wear shorts, go. And then you can say set weather rainy, and it gives you this. So that's what we use if statements for, if else statements for. So we use them to differentiate between different conditions in our application and what we want to run for that specific condition. So yep, let me see if I can take a few more examples. So lastly, writing functions ES5, ES6, and IIFE. That's quite difficult to pronounce. So let me see, what's the easiest way to go about this? So when we're talking about functions, right, in JavaScript, there are two ways of writing functions now. We can either use the ES5. Let me make this a comment. ES5. And let me show you a good example of ES5 function. We can say that, say const ES5 is equals to function return this is an ES5 function. This is a way to write an ES5 function. Now, if we're to write this using the ES6 syntax, we can say that we can do this const ES6 So we replace the word function with this. So the function and the parenthesis is replaced with this. So once you get that idea, it's easy to write the syntax. It's a bit tricky to pick up at first, but going from ES5 to ES6 is just about removing the function keyword and then replacing it with this parenthesis and fat arrow. So this is called fat arrow. So you just remove your function and parenthesis, replace it with this. So in case maybe you're doing refactoring sometimes, and you can say return, this is an ES6 function. And the way to call your function is to call the variable name. So if you want to call this, we do this. So this is how to call your function. And you want to call this, you say ES6, and always add the parentheses. So assuming there's an argument here, like say name, it means we need to pass a value here. So the value could be anything, but in this case, let's say our name is a string and we want to pass that in here. We can say that we can do this. So this is called string templating. it's a way to pass in a variable inside the string. So we can say this is an ES6 function with the name, and we can now pass in this variable here. And then when we put this name here, say ES6, get this. So we can run this in our browser and quickly see the results. You can see this is an ES6 function with the name ES6. So the value that we passed in here is what is being used as the variable here, just like the initial example that we passed. And if we want to convert this to ES5, we can say ES5 underscore 1 and make this ES5 underscore 1. And other than this, we can say a function. And this is okay, we need name. It's 5 underscore 1. Still the same result. So there are different ways of writing our function using the different syntax. There's also more to the differences between ES5 and ES6, but that's another topic of its own that we could go into it extensively. Like, in what case do you have to use ES5, or is it preferable to use an ES5? And in what case is it preferable to use ES6? The only thing I can tell you is that going forward, if you can pick up the ES6 way of writing functions, it's better, because if you're going into web development, definitely you'll be seeing a lot of ES6 syntax, and it's mostly the most recommended way of writing functions in your web application. So I don't think there's any what's it called? There's any drawback to using CS6. You just need to know the caveat. It has a little bit of caveat. Like, there are some things that the original ES5 function can do that the ES6 cannot do. Probably just one or two, but it's just good to know some of that. So yeah, this is a simple example of how to write a function. We can also maybe just run through one quick example. Say const. Let's do this. Let's say array. Oh, let's say word. This is a string of words. And we want to create a simple function that converts this string of words into an array. So let's say const convert word to array. It's always good to name your functions in a way that you can remember what they do for the long term. So what do? We can say the word dot split. So we're splitting by, this, and then this gives us, let's hold this in a variable constant word array. And we can now say that, so we can return this, actually return this directly. And as usual, to call our function, we do this. Another way of doing this could be doing something like this, say passing word as an argument, and then passing this here. So if we run this, you can see that we have an array of, this is a string of words. And then from here, we can also manipulate this further. So because we don't have much time, I know a lot of you have questions, I would stop here and start taking your questions. So there are still more things that we could do to this array of strings. We could actually maybe capitalize each letter of the word, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I'm ready to take your questions. Let me stop sharing.
So, okay, Brian, thank you. So I will put the questions on the screen.
Okay.
So this is your first question.
So it says that why did you include async in the script tag and what does the attribute do? Yeah, good question. So if we look at the previous example that we have here, one of the good thing about JavaScript is that JavaScript is asynchronous. So what I'm going to explain is a bit technical, but I'll try to break it down as simple as possible. There are different kind of programming languages and they all have their different behaviors. So JavaScript has a single thread, while most other programming languages like say Python, C Sharp, and the rest, they have multiple threads. Now, what is a thread? You say that we are running all of this on our computer. Our computer has a CPU and other attributes. Now, when you run this as a program, what basically happens is that all of this is converted into bytecodes and being processed. But JavaScript is limited in the sense that it can only run one thread, while other programming languages can run multiple threads. So which means that if the work is too much, or for other programming languages, they can create another thread to run other activities, or I would say other actions in the application. But JavaScript can only run one thread. However, that does not mean JavaScript is not as powerful as compared to the others. That is where async comes in. So async is the nature of JavaScript that now allows it to do multiple things. And if just to add this, you can look up event loops. Let me just add this here. Look up event loops, event loop to understand the synchronous nature of JavaScript. So this is a very difficult topic concept to explain within a short period of time, but async means that JavaScript can now leverage on other APIs for it to perform multiple tasks. So just look at it as, say, if you have 4 cups, you can only serve 4 people tea at once. So if C Sharp maybe can spawn, say, 4 threads or 8 threads, depending on the CPU of your device. So it means that you can serve 8 people tea at the same time. Now, what JavaScript does is JavaScript cannot provide 8 cups like maybe C Sharp to serve 8 people tea at the same time. But JavaScript can use this 1 cup to serve 8 people tea. Guess how? By maybe adding straws, maybe to the sides of the cup to now enable the other people have tea all at once. So the ability to add the multiple straw is now the async nature of JavaScript. That's like a layman's term of explaining what async is. So it is that attribute of JavaScript that now makes it to perform multiple operation on a single thread because it just has a single thread. It's singly threaded. So if there's any other question I could take, let me not spend too much time on that one. And say, please, what if your JavaScript to display all changes? Please, what about if you want your JavaScript to display all changes in a card? I don't get this question. I don't know if I can get more insight on that. Like say, why would you include async in the script tag and what does it do? Okay, I've taken that. And in the function example, is separator a keyword? No, separator is not a keyword. There are some JavaScript keywords, and so when you use something like an IDE, keywords are usually like highlighted with some color, something like, let me say, for instance, var is a keyword, let is a keyword. There are so many other keywords. Document is a keyword. Um, there's so many other keywords, but these are the ones. Alert, depending on the environment. Alert doesn't work in server-side JavaScript. So that's why earlier I talked about server-side and client-side. So in some cases, there are some particular APIs of JavaScript that are not operational given the environment. So alert means that it's a client-side JavaScript. When you see alert, when you see prompt, all these are client-side JavaScript. So, yep. So those are keywords that these are words that you cannot just you can use them as variables. It's bad practice. So I can take another question. Said okay, another question.
So, hi, Brian. There's no other question. I don't know if
Okay.
anyone is typing.
Okay, so there was a question that I didn't get more insight to, talking about the card. If maybe they could give more insight because we still have about 9 minutes, and I can, properly explain some of those concepts.
All right. I do know that. Okay. The person should be on the call to write more about that question. Okay. So thank you so much, Brian.
Okay, thanks, Samaka. So I would share I was trying to go through as quickly as possible because I thought maybe there would be a lot of questions saying that this is the basic like a basic introduction into JavaScript, and some of these concepts can be pretty overwhelming. Like, why should I use const instead of let, and all of that? Like, for instance, just to reiterate again, if I do const and maybe I want to change this now, I can do this. Maybe rather than saying prompt, maybe alert this. So if I need to do this, I need to change this to let, and then I'm able to do this. So it's one of those things that one of those differences between let and constant. For var, it's just bad practice. So I would say just know to avoid var, and then you can use let or const depending on what your use case is. Yeah, so I hope that was kind of stimulating because one thing about JavaScript is that JavaScript is really interesting. It's fun to use, very easy to pick up, but very hard to master because even as a senior engineer or say a professional, there are some concepts in JavaScript that are still really confusing because of some of these tiny caveats you always have here and there. Like in maybe you're working for a company that builds software, and your manager asks you like, why did you use constant? Sorry, why did you use let here? Since probably you expect this variable not to change, and you might have your reasons and all of that. So these are things that you also need to know so that you're not being asked to explain concepts that you should have known beforehand. So yeah, I guess that's it. Without any further questions, I'll say thank you guys for your time. I'm going to share the slides, and then if you need it, I think you can reach out to Amaka.
All right. So thank you so much, Brian, for your time and for taking the class today. We really appreciate. Also, guys, I put in Brian's LinkedIn link in the comment section, so you can go ahead and connect to him on LinkedIn. So thank you once again, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks,
Next time.
guys. Yeah, my pleasure being here.
All right. Okay. Bye,
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah. Bye, guys.
All right. Bye, Brian.